Like most, if not all, college students, a lot of changes came in my life when I started college. The adjustment from living with my parents to living by myself was a lot. Not seeing my family and friends and my loved ones in general as much because I moved away and lived with a dorm with some random people was a lot. Transitioning from consistent part time to now full time employment was and still is a lot to deal with. The impact of having to make those adjustments at the time raised many new worries for me. For example, when I started to work full time last year, I was excessively worried about how I was going to find time to spend with my friends and my loved ones and my partner, especially since most of the time that I was spending not working went to catching up with school and doing homework and participating in organizations and on the campus and all that stuff. Now, before we continue, what is worrying? Psychologically, worrying is a form of negative, repetitive thinking about future events with uncertain outcomes. From a mental health perspective, worrying is strongly associated with many negative mental health outcomes like anxiety, depression. One of the many studies conducted during COVID-19 emphasized that association, as people at the beginning of the pandemic showed significantly higher levels of worry. Those levels went down as time passed on, but in countries where the lockdown was reintroduced, worries shot back up again. The negative mental health consequences I mentioned earlier also increased during COVID, as individuals who had higher levels of worry about it had drastically worse health outcomes than people who weren't as worried about it. Now, this isn't to say that worrying can't serve an important and positive purpose. In fact, many studies show that worrying contributes to proactive behavior. For example, if you fail a test in school, worrying can prompt you to study harder to pass the next exam. However, there are other times where excessively worrying can be very dangerous, especially because it lengthens and intensifies all the negative emotions you have about the uncertain outcomes that you don't want. So in the same way that worrying can prompt you to study harder to increase the chances of passing the next test and blah, 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 worrying can also cause you to engage in damaging behaviors, like you just giving up and taking the F. I'm using school as an example here, not just because I'm a college student, but also because worrying excessively can be very common in academic contexts, regardless of whether you're in college or not. Young adults, like me in general, typically worry excessively more often than individuals who are older. From a physical health perspective, worrying can also contribute to problems like disordered eating. One study in particular found that women who were transitioning into college worried or started their semester worried showcase symptoms of disordered eating to strive for fitness. In particular, going the other way, individuals who excessively worry may also binge eat or eat excessively in general as a way to cope with their worries. For adolescents or young adults who haven't reached their mid-20s, worrying increases the likelihood of next day risky behaviors, especially if you're amongst your peers. This is likely due to the fact that your prefrontal cortex as an adolescent, which is the part of your brain responsible for controlling your impulses, hasn't developed and will not develop fully until you reach your mid-20s. If you have a habit of worrying, you may experience many negative sleep outcomes, like taking longer to fall asleep, having low sleep quality in general, or just feeling more disoriented for a longer period of time after you wake up. Me and a lot of my friends and family have dealt with these kinds of health issues due to excessively worrying. For example, when I started working full time, the amount of time I spent working out in the gym lowered, drastically. I was either inconsistent or at some points, at some stretches of certain months, I didn't even go into the gym at all. In general, when you combine the schoolwork and the regular, working at a job, I was working around 75 hours a week. Essentially, there was no free time for me. Anytime I was given the opportunity to not work and I had some free time, I was spending that time trying to recover lost sleep, which was even harder during that time because I was trying to drink so much coffee to stay up that when I crashed, my crash was really huge, and a good day of sleep was at that point 12 hours. Over time, though, I took many measures to prevent myself from excessively worrying in situations where I felt overwhelmed. And as time passed, I got a lot better at managing. One of the main techniques I use to prevent excessively worrying is distancing myself from myself, which is the topic of this video, otherwise known technically as temporal distancing. Now, what is temporal distancing? You're essentially analyzing your current state right now, excessively worried, from the perspective of you in the future. The current research on temporal distancing shows it can lessen the stress and worry that you feel at that moment and actually increase the amount of positive feelings that you have. In both the short and the long term, making temporal distancing a habitual response to worry predicts lesser worry and greater life satisfaction. Now, while researchers have disagreements over whether temporal distancing is less or more helpful to older people as it is to younger people, it was still shown to be helpful for both parties. Researchers also agree that projecting yourself farther into the future when you do this technique actually maximizes benefits as opposed to imagining yourself, in the near future, like the next day. It's not very helpful. Now, why does temporal distancing work? The reason is because it makes you aware of the impermanence of the stressor. In other words, when you think of yourself now from the perspective of you in the future, what you're really doing is imagining yourself now in the grand scheme of your entire life. When you put yourself in the context of the grand scheme of your life, it helps you realize that what you're worried about, the thing that's making you worry, is not as important as you think it is. It will eventually go away. The effect of temporal distancing on reducing your stress is consistently determined by whether utilizing it allows you to focus on the impermanent nature of the thing causing you to worry. Impermanence focus plays a causal role in decreased reactivity to stress in general, even if you don't use temporal distancing. Now, this isn't to say that your worries are not something to be acknowledged because they don't have importance in the grand scheme of your life. It is simply to say that the level of worry you naturally experience typically isn't proportional to the objective level of worry you should have. In other words, it is very easy for humans to over-worry. Now, what causes you to over-worry about stuff? There are many reasons, but here are two possibilities that I want to mention to you now. One, locus of control. Locus of control refers to the amount of control you feel you have over your own outcomes in your life. A person with an internal locus of control believes they have control over the things that happen to them. A person with an external locus of control believes external forces control their outcomes rather than themselves. For example, in a study examining older people's level of worry about the increased possibility of falling while doing risky activities, older people who had an internal locus of control made positive adjustments to their behavior to reduce their likelihood of falling, while the minority of people who had an external locus of control perceived the likelihood of falling as an unpreventable threat, as inevitable, which triggered feelings of panic. Another reason causing you to overworry possibly is if you have a pre-existing condition like generalized anxiety disorder, anxiety. As some of you may know, excessive worry is a key characteristic of generalized anxiety disorder. So obviously, people who have it worry disproportionately to the objective threat causing the worry. That being said though, studies conducted on people with the disorder have shown that it may be helpful to treat their worries by showing evidence that their worries did not come to fruition and as such are unrealistic, unlikely, and unhelpful. Temporal distancing basically reflects that same kind of treatment. It allows you to evaluate your worry in a larger context and more objectively determine whether your worry is unrealistic, unlikely, or unhelpful. Now, am I saying that this is the number one solution to all your worries? Of course not, and it shouldn't be. No amount of temporal distancing is going to fully alleviate the worry that comes from losing a family member who has played a large part in your life. But it can be a solution to your standard everyday worry that, if you let affect you, will over time substantially impact your mental health in a negative way. Temporal distancing has helped me since I started subconsciously doing it, a few years ago when I was finishing up high school. And maybe it can help you. So yeah, try it. Try doing what I just said. See if it happens. See if it works. See if it means anything. If it doesn't, I mean, I tried, Other than that, you can find links to all the studies and research I did for this video for 24 hours straight in the description below. And yeah, like and subscribe. Comment about your experiences if you want. Maybe somebody in the comments who's more professional than I am, because I'm not a psychologist, can help you with maybe some more techniques that I did not mention in this video. Cheers.